What have you tried, or what have you learned, from these historical contexts that you've applied to what you do in turn?
Oh, dude, like everything. The gladiator training was a lot of your typical athletic lifts, like this gladiator deadlift. Dude, I've had scoliosis my whole life. This thing completely unlocked my back. Gladiators in general were fascinating because when I reconstructed their training, it kind of resembled like modern athlete training. Like there were sprints, tons of plyometrics.
Did any of these cultures talk about rest or recuperation or recovery?
Ancient sports nutritionists would talk about how you should eat mildly before you train, that athletes should sleep extra. And I was like that's bulletproof information. They also used hot and cold therapy. They use mobility. Wow. But it's important to remember, we get our scientific institutions from the ancient Greeks. Bad diets too. So it would have been right around 480 BC. There was this guy who was actually a runner who went completely carnivore and won the Olympics. And after that, the next Olympic Games, everyone showed up. Half the runners were carnivore. And no one had ever done it before.
Does it make it noticeably harder to run if you are a little heavier? Or is the progression of getting heavier like slow enough to where maybe it doesn't matter a ton for you?
You get a bit of both. So you can definitely tell that you're heavier when you're running. Also, if you're slow like me, makes less of a like performance-based difference, but you're definitely heavier. On the other hand, if you are like too light, like, you don't want to be running around at like 6% body fat, especially doing like the wilderness ultras that I do, where it's like, okay, I need enough body fat to get through camp and then get through, a multi-day event, a week, the 2 weeks or longer. At which point I know I'm going to be losing a lot of weight in the process. Like, so I've had to actually do 2 separate fat bulks, 6 and 8 pounds of body fat, just intentionally, which is actually kind of challenging when you're training and doing all that, just to prepare for events.
A little bit more common than people think, right? Because if someone's going to do a specific type of swim, someone's going to do a specific type of run or some sort of, venture across the United States, right, they may gain a little bit of body fat going into that.
Yeah, so my buddy Zach Bitter and I were recently talking about this on his podcast, but like if you're going to be doing these, like, because I'm right now getting ready to start training camp for a 1,000-mile run. And so, yeah, the goal is, if everything goes well, I'll be one of the very few.
Bullshit, dog. Why do you do this shit?
Well, if the goal, I truly love it. I truly love it. I do.
You do?
I do. I can't it's not, I can't take credit for like the hard part of it. Like even, I know it's like a lot of like running influencers and motivational people. They talk about, how it's important to like cultivate a savage mindset by doing this thing you hate called running. And I can't relate to any of that because I love what I do,
You're beyond all that.
No, it's just, it's hard, but it's enjoyable. Yeah. Like, we've all
It's what you chose.
Yeah.
What you chose to enjoy to do.
Well, and I think that's also an important thing when you talk about how hard something is or isn't, if you signed up for it and chose it, of all the jobs in the world, you chose that as your job and you show up every day and just kind of talk about how hard it is. What does that make you? So that, at least that's my perspective on that. And so I just, but the truth is I love it. So if all goes well, I will be one of a very small number of human beings on planet Earth that's run 1,000 miles in a single effort. Yeah, four digits. There's some people, Timothy Olson is one I know off the top of my head. He's a guy who did, for a while, he held the record for the Pacific Crest Trail. Mm-hmm. And the way that he ran that was pretty much continuous all the way. He was stopping along the way as you have to, just for simple bathroom, food, little bits of sleep when you're talking. He was running for like 50-something days. So it's like stuff like that. But yes, like that would qualify as a single effort. There's also some, the alternative would be like stage races. Like, hey, it's on day 1, we're going to go here. Day 2, we're going to go there. And it's like, planned out. Some of those can get kind of longer because it's a little more measured and the daily outputs are a little less. Mm-hmm. Whereas what I do is just basically run. Plan to stop at night for some amount of time to switch out supplies. And
you and I run quite the opposite. I know that you ran like unassisted, like 500 miles, right?
Yeah, state of Oregon.
So like in my fanny pack, there's like little things of honey in there.
Good.
There's electrolytes. In my car, I have like extra water. I got like rations. I got stuff like all over the place because I'm terrified that something weird will happen to me on like a run. But when you're going out there, I know that you are packing a lot. It's not like you're not packing stuff to make sure your performance is good, but you are going without like meeting up with anybody and all that kind of thing.
So the way I do it is either unassisted or semi-assisted. So unassisted would be like many of the events that I've done where we just bury caches of food ahead of time, or even have them mailed to like small town post offices that I'll be passing near that I can divert and go resupply. Whereas this last one I did when I ran across the hottest desert on earth, the Sonora Desert, that one was a little bit of both, because there was a certain amount of access point for the film crew, to follow and make their documentary. And then there was also like my crew to bring water and, drop things off. And then we also buried, like we had caches of steak shake powder, literally just buried throughout the desert, along with like glycogen powder and like jerky and peanut butter.
Imagine if a bear came across that, he'd get all jacked.
He would, super jacked. And so, it's like I would know where these are. And then, I had a phone with me.
Yeah,
with
my
GPS.
customer service people, they were like, this guy needs this much protein powder. I'm like, he's going pretty far. I think he probably does.
And then, they did. And they hooked it all up. That was, like I said, I was sipping it like just the whole way. But
and then how did you come up with some of that? Because I know that you have, I know that you're into like the warrior side of things and the ancient times and how people used to train and stuff, but there's also a lot of sophistication that goes into staying hydrated properly during these runs and stuff. And so who helped you come up with a game plan, and how do you game plan for some of these insane adventures that you're doing?
I can't take all the credit. Honestly, I have my nutritionist, Jordan Sullivan, he's also the nutritionist to Israel Adesanya, Alexander Volkanovski, Leon Edwards, a lot of the big UFC stars. So the reason that I sought him out and brought him on as my nutritionist is not just because he's the best in terms of performance, but he's an expert in performance while depleted, particularly dehydrated, like fighters have to go through in their weight cuts to prepare for a fight, and which inevitably also have, I've lost 20 pounds of water over the course of a run before. And you're replacing it as you go. So by the time you're done, you're only 8 or 10 pounds lighter, but adding it all up. And so we track things like that, fluid loss, hydration. And then I also work with a group called Scratch Labs out of Boulder, Colorado. And they're experts. They're owned by a guy named Alan Lim. And he is actually one of the cycling coaches for the U.S. men's national team. And so he's, again, an expert in endurance outputs.
And they produce hydration products,
they do,
right?
like glycogen, primarily glycogen-based stuff. So, you get your clustered dextrose with a little bit of salt and some potassium, different mixes and stuff like that. So just able to, stuff I'm able to drink while I'm on the move. And then I'm also somewhat known for raw milk and ginger ale being primary fuel sources while I'm running.
Together?
No,
thank God. Okay.
Separately.
Okay.
I love milk, and it has everything you need.
On a separate note, I saw one of the ginger ale companies get sued recently for having no ginger at all.
That's a bummer. I like the ginger beer ones. I like the ginger beer, like the Reeds and the, you know what I mean? Those ones. There's another brand I usually get.
Particular reasons for those types of things? Is there something that can help do for your gut or something?
Yeah, so the bubbles help with your gut in general, but ginger, obviously, very good for the stomach. It helps with the queasiness. It also helps keep my appetite going, keeps my stomach balanced, keeps the nausea away, especially if again, running across the hottest desert on earth. The biggest thing, my body was pretty well adapted to the sensation of heat. I wasn't overheating and it felt like I was going to collapse, but I just lost my appetite repeatedly. Because if anyone who's been in a super hot situation, you know what I mean, just all day out in the sun, you don't really feel like sitting down all of a sudden and just putting a bunch of food in your dehydrated gut, So that was definitely an issue. But again, we plan for these things, with Jordan, with Scratch, and we make a strategy because you always want to perform well as an athlete. But when it's hey, if I mess this up, I could die or end up out here or have some miscalculation, you tend to, be a little bit more particular in how things go.
Let me ask you this, man. We were just taking a walk, the Fat Fours, the other day, looking at Christmas lights, and we ran into somebody who did some ultramarathons, and she mentioned that on each of her ultramarathons, her whole face swelled up, where she couldn't really see towards the end of it, but she loves it, right? I keep hearing about all these different side effects that happen after ultramarathons, things happen to your feet. So my question is, I know you enjoy it, but is there anything good that happens to your body? I know you probably adapt to that stress, right, but do you always end up with something towards the end of it?
No. I'm admittedly more durable than most just because of all the weightlifting and the fact that I run at a pretty slow, consistent pace, whereas a lot of the runners run really fast, take a break, run really fast, take a break, and I just kind of keep more consistent, which is, a little easier on my body.
You're generally at 11, 12 minute. You don't even really care, I don't think, but 11, 12-minute mile pace is probably correct, right?
11 to 14.
Gotcha.
And that's including stops too.
Miles.
Got it.
Yeah. At this last, right here, that was the Fat Ox. So I was actually it was a 24-hour race. You just run 1 mile laps constantly for 24 hours. I was aiming for and on track to get about 110 miles done in that 24-hour period. And then at mile 33, I got a fracture in my foot that got progressively worse. And so I ended up going for the next 18 hours, just like limping at literally a limping pace. And then I'd stop and try to get it taped and maybe switch a shoe and put on an extra sock and then get going. And nothing, it's just all in vain at the end of the day. But I did have a good time. It was frustrating, but as much as it would have been tempting for me to be like, I didn't get the result I came here for today. Might as well pack it up and go home. It's you already came all this way. For one, you might as well do your best to scratch that itch. And then on the other hand, like I tell my athletes, it's, your character is defined by who you are on the rough days, not the good ones. And so it's if I'm out here and I'm just, telling people that they should train and do their best and leave it all on the line, and then I just go home because things don't go good on the first 6 hours of a 24-hour race, that's not a very character forward moment,
And you have your brother here today with you, and he used to work for Slingshot, and he was at Super Training. I know that you were saying you're visiting your mother as well. She's coming into town. Seems like you have a pretty tight knit family. I met your fiance. Are you married yet?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I met your wife before.
Yeah.
Seems like you're pretty close to a lot of your family members.
Yeah.
Is any of that ever taken into consideration when you're doing some of this? Do you have any worry or concern that you might do something and that might be it?
Oh, might die?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going a different way with that. Yeah.
Just because there's other people.
No.
It's not like you're a lone wolf out there and no one gives a fuck about you and you're just out there doing your own thing.
No, 100%.
You got a lot of people, it seems like, that care about you, that rely on you and so on.
No, you're right. That's a great question.
Maybe you're just a selfish motherfucker.
Yeah. Maybe. But no, so some people know that my dad died in the mountains. He fell off a cliff and actually survived the fall. But when he realized that his whole body was broken, he made the decision to shoot himself, which is, understandable in that situation. I didn't hold him against it. But the point being, that's generally pretty typical for how men in my family go out, going back at least the last couple centuries. So if that were to happen to me, yeah, you don't want that, but it's all right. The world will continue to turn and I'll have, died doing something I love. So does it bother me? No, not really. Do I accept that it's more likely even than possible? Yeah, sure. But, that's why you work hard while you're here. You hopefully leave your family in a good situation and, you live every day in a way that makes it so they feel no shame when you pass, That's all you can do. It's like, all due respect to Brian Johnson, I don't think we can live forever. And I just choose personally not to pretend as if so when I'm choosing how to live my life.
Now, with this 1,000-mile ultramarathon, what's your plans for actually how to make it happen? How are you going to be doing it?
I'm going to be starting at the Mexico border in Southern California and running the entire coast of California up to the Oregon border. And it's about 1,200 miles total, but I will only be running somewhere right around 1,000 because there's areas that can't be run. There's some cliff areas without runnable surfaces. There's military bases along the way that, they don't allow pedestrians by, and et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But I'm just going to really try to chip away at it at a very slow, consistent pace, nothing crazy, 35, somewhere between 30 and 40 miles a day, depending on the terrain and weather. And hopefully we don't have any flooding issues or having to divert for that or supply issues. But just slowly, calmly, chip away one day at a time. And it's with the multi-day stuff, it's weird because the hardest days are always the early days.
Yeah.
Once you get yourself in a rhythm and you're flowing, then you're going, At that point, it's more about, oh yeah, that was cute. At that point, it's just more about not getting injured and making it to the end because mentally you're oh no, here, I'm in the fight, I'm doing this.
What does keep you going?
I frequently obviously get asked why, even by other ultra runners who are well, why do the like the wilderness part of it, where there's the risk is so much higher. We have to carry, you're doing all this with 30 pounds on your back. Like, why not just like run normal ultras? Like, and the truth is, I like to live my life as the man in the arena. Like, I like to experience those things, feel those things, and interact with life up close and, unfettered. And that is, like, I'm not a Spartan warrior. Like, just wasn't born in that time or place. So I'm in the here and now. And this is something I do that makes me feel alive and gives me that sensation, and I get to actually put my money where my mouth is and make, demonstrate or test if my character adds up to my idea of myself. And, and if not, where I can improve it.
I saw a comedian today talking about how we kind of have come out of the woods, and maybe that wasn't a great decision because we're kind of supposed to be savage. And she was just like, think about it. You just sit there all day long denying all these things that you want to do. Yeah. You want to kill somebody. You want to do this. You want to do that. She's like, we used to just do it. Yeah. She's like, now there's all these rules. You can't do it. And she was saying how she's amazed that people have willpower in the first place, because we do have a lot of these things going on in the back of our mind of doing these weird kind of crazy things.
Yeah. I mean, it's there. You can only suppress, human nature so much. And so I think, you can't deny it. So your only alternative is to channel it, and, how you're going to do that. But like in this book I just wrote, it talks about how, the whole foundation of the entire book is that the human, like the warrior's mythos is one of the most enduring in human history. It's part of us, even if we aren't actually fighters or warriors, because it's more about our human potential. Like what can we do if we live by a code of honor and train with purpose, even if it's not to be a warrior, like what's possible. And then it just looks at how people for the last couple of thousand years have done that, from Africa to the Native American warriors to, Spartans and gladiators. And so like that, for me, that's always been, I'll say, a source of strength, but really examples, like, a place that I can always look for examples. Like if I have even like a moral quandary, like go read some Marcus Aurelius, like, and come away from that telling me you didn't learn something about how to just be a decent human being. The guy talks about how we're all essentially, like, we're all on team human. Like we're all on the same side, going through the same struggles, fighting the same demons, trying to move toward the same things, and that we should be doing so cooperatively. And like, you should look at your fellow man with that in mind and with empathy always. And like there's, that's bulletproof. That's a pretty bulletproof philosophy. So for me, and then of course with the training, it's like, okay, well, I wanted to be a guy who could fight, was strong, had endurance, was fast. Like, how do we do that? Because quite frankly, a lot of the modern athletic coaches I talked to early on were like, nah, you're too many moving parts was the term I kept hearing over and over again. And I was like, but the Spartans did it. Like, they won the Olympic Games consistently in strength sports, endurance sports, and pancration and wrestling. And and they dominated the entire Mediterranean with their military forces. So obviously it's not impossible. And so that was really what kind of got me on the track with digging into ancient societies and figuring it out. And in truth, it's also, I've come to learn that history is the best science lab there is. Like, people look at like ancient history as if it's like mysticism or separate from science. The thing is, like, science is great, but if you study a group of 500 people, how is that going to compare to 10,000 years of people doing the same thing over and over again? Like, we
500 people, and then get the average of the 500 people.
Average of the 500. Okay. And so it's like, we know for sure that picking stones up off the ground works. It worked 10,000 years ago and it works for the mountain today. You know what I mean? Like, if you pick a heavy, or a sandbag, you pick a heavy stone or a sandbag.
How many sets? How many reps?
Exactly. You know what I mean? And so
can't do it every day.
Well, then you're
going to get too tired. You're going to lose muscle mass.
Yeah. And then the other argument, exactly. And the other argument is that that studies present the most recent cutting edge evidence, but that by its very nature is untrue. Because the thing is, something happens. We observe it. We want to study it. It takes at least 10 to 15 years to get any sort of organized data, to organize the studies, to understand what you're studying, know where to aim those studies. Mm-hmm. So any latest studies you get, you're getting info on something way past the fact. Like,
also too, I mean, you just say we took, a bunch of trained athletes that lift weights, and they're predominantly explosive athletes. And then we said, let's put them on this program. Let's get them working towards running 20 miles. Well, if we did a 4-week study, we can easily show, oh my God, look, we were right. They were going to lose a lot of muscle mass, but we don't really know or understand the adaptation afterwards. We don't really know or understand the different things that maybe they possibly could have done to circumvent the weight loss in muscle mass. There's a lot of stuff. I always think it's interesting how, people say you can't do this, you can't do that. And there's guys like Arnold and many others who've pointed out, like, I love when someone says that. Yeah. Then it's my opportunity to rise to the occasion and say, hey, I guess we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, that was very much, shoot, you were the guy that helped me deadlift 500 and plus pounds and run 50 miles in the same day. And like, that was, repeatedly, people that, that you can't balance those two attributes. And I didn't have any like prior training or anything. So that's just like adaptation. That just shows you what like simple adherence to a consistent program, or a consistent plan will do. You know what I mean? And so I think it's really important not to listen too much to other people, especially experts, because it can be limiting. Like, it can be motivating and that's great, but it can also be limiting,
You need to sometimes not know so much.
Agreed. And that was honestly my biggest strength early on. Like when we first met, was just my naivete. I was like, I knew what I wanted, and I just didn't know enough not that I wasn't supposed to have it. You
think that applies across the board? Like you do jujitsu as well. Like, do you think it applies to martial arts and stuff? Just to being a little, you always want to respect everything that you're going into, but being a little dumb and a little numb to it.
It is. I think you also have to have naivete in the sense that, like, I'm almost too naive to be embarrassed about trying a bunch of new stuff. Like, I got offered my jiu-jitsu purple belt after 2.5 years. And that is, generally about half the time that it takes most people. And most of that was because I just relentlessly ran at the things I was terrible at. I got tapped over and over again for the first 6 months, like even my other white belts, and then after that, it was just, like, because I didn't shy away from the crappy spots, and I didn't really know, like, I was too naive to know that, like, I was supposed to be embarrassed by being tapped, or that I would, you know what I mean? Like, to adhere to some of the more nuanced aspects of the culture. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, cool, I'm just a wrestler. I'm just going to like charge into guillotine, and I'll figure it out later. And I figured it out. But the same thing, yeah, if I had come in like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to do this, and I'm not supposed to be too much here or there. Or the big one was, I'm not supposed to go train at other schools, or for early on, I would just train at any, I would train as far and wide as I could.
Oh yeah. People warned me about my elbows hurting really bad, and people warned me about fingers, my joints and stuff.
Yeah. So I was like, I heard like Joe Rogan mention it like twice, and I was like, sign me up. I'm cool. Let's go see what this is about.
What have you tried, or what have you learned, from these historical contexts that you've applied to what you do in training?
Oh, dude, like everything. Yeah. Like, and that's not so. For one example, I found in my book, I outline an actual exact workout plan used by Roman gladiators. This is like super rare. You never get like exact workout programs laid out in all the history. But this guy, Galen, considered the father of modern medicine by many, spent his early youth when he was training to become a doctor, being in what they called a living anatomist or an exercise physiologist at a gladiator training school. So he lived with them up close, trained them, did all this stuff, and he left detailed writings on how they trained, what they ate, all these things. Mm-hmm. So I was able to reconstruct a lot of that. Like most of it was already translated from Latin, So just like in terms of translating it from, because they didn't have names. They weren't like deadlift this, that. He was like turn, sit, pick up this, do this. So you had to deconstruct it, reconstruct it. But when I did, he had this exercise that I call the Gladiator deadlift, because again, it didn't have a name. Essentially uses two relatively light dumbbells, and you place them on either side of you. With your opposite hand, you reach over, you pick one up in like a crossbody, like a hockey RDL, and then rotating to the outside, you do the same with the opposite hand to the opposite side, and then come up, and then you hinge and place them both back down. Dude, I've had scoliosis my whole life. This thing completely unlocked my back. And I've done rotational, anti-rotational, I've done all this stuff, but rotational through a dynamically changing plane.
Placebo studies. Show me the studies, James.
Do you know if there's a video of that exercise
on my
anywhere?
Instagram, maybe?
Oh boy. Yes, but I'm trying to remember exactly where.
It's on your Instagram page.
What is it called again?
Instagram or YouTube. I've just been calling it the Gladiator deadlift because there's no name for it. Like I literally found this in an ancient text,
It kind of sounds like the instructions from Peter Griffin on how to do a deadlift.
yeah, basically.
Bandage for back.
Think like
twist
double
and
hockey deadlift.
Because he rotates way to the side.
Nsima, I just had an idea. I'll text it to you.
Okay.
I just got an idea. But yeah, so it's like, stuff like that, like I never, and it's pretty simple variation, but gladiators in general are fascinating because when I reconstructed their training, it kind of resembled like modern athlete training. Like there were sprints, tons of plyometrics. Like one thing was that they had a lot of extra shoulder exercises, which kind of made sense from hefting spears and shields and all that. But okay,
kind of intuitive, right? Like I want to move fast, so I'm going to do things that look fast.
Yeah, I mean explosive.
That's a pretty simple thing to follow. Like jumping, doing push-ups fast. Basically any exercise you could think. Yeah, sprinting.
Sprints. They also actually were big on walking too. Just literally just walking. Right. Romans in general were
probably walking with some sort of weight.
Gladiators, they talk about that. They also talk about organized weighted carries. So the gladiator training was a lot of your typical athletic lifts, like this gladiator deadlift. Plyos, weighted carries were both huge parts of it, extra like sports specific stuff for the shoulders. Additionally, this is different, but the Spartans, who were around, some centuries before the gladiators, did a lot of really cool stuff like lunge variations and stuff while holding dumbbells straight out, or they called them halteres, but they were essentially like stone kettlebell dumbbells, holding them straight out here, good posture, tight core, and then just doing like forward lunges, backward lunges. And like, even if you try it with a pair of 20-pound dumbbells now, super light, it is insanely difficult. But that's specific training for shoulders for standing. And the phalanx, we've all seen 300, how they fight, shield, spear, do that for hours. Like you're going to need some delts on you. You know what I mean? And, there we go.
And you said lighter weights?
Yeah, super light, man. This is like, you could build up to heavier, but like kind of like with the Jeff curl, you wouldn't want to just like load it up super heavy. But this is on its way like a rotating Jeff curl. And, but yeah,
it seems simple.
It's super simple, but like I said, when do you actually rotate under resistance through the full plane of motion all the way through? Unless you're doing like reverse bent presses or some crazy stuff, And so my back is like, again, it feels better than ever right now.
Did any of these cultures talk about, or was there any regard to rest or recuperation or recovery?
So actually talking about the ancient Greeks, they had something called the tetrad cycle, which was, I've used it. I actually just used it. I reconstructed an entire, I take pride in this, the world's only historically reconstructed Spartan strength and conditioning program. I did deep dive pottery shards, archaeologists, all sorts of stuff rebuilding this. And part of that was, I'm sorry, the original question, sorry, I just spaced.
It's about
rest. Rest and recovery.
Yes, the tetrad. I was like, anyway, the tetrad cycle. So part of that, in that, they talk about how ancient Greeks, a lot of them, so that would be, one exception would be runners. Runners didn't follow this, but pretty much everyone else, grapplers, strength athletes, they followed the tetrad cycle, which was basically one day of what they would call like short preparatory exercise. So that's like a 20 to 30 minute like plyo workout, like a few, ones and triples of like some explosive jumps, some very short sprints, nothing fatiguing at all, but just activating the nervous system. Then the next day after that would be a longer, more strenuous exercise, like say you're like full body hypertrophy day, something like that. The day after that would be active recovery. So rucking, swimming, some mobility, right? And then on the final day after that would be like skill-based training, working on your techniques for lifts, if you're a boxer, you're throwing your punches, wrestler, you know what I mean? The sports, and then also some like sport specific training, like say if you're a wrestler doing some Bulgarian bags or whatever, and speaking in modern terms. And then they would keep to the cycle, and then you could interrupt it also with just an extra day of rest at the end if you needed. But apparently runners didn't do this because they thought it was a little too much volume by the end of the week. So the early Olympic
runners have always been anti-lifters.
Okay, a little bit. But
I wonder too, like surrounding their training and stuff, I'm kind of just imagining there's probably like celebrations of sorts. There's probably like times where they eat and drink a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe that went along with training. So maybe they trained really hard for a few weeks, and then maybe there was like almost like a big ass party where they ate a lot and maybe rested a little bit and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, after the games. I mean, that, you see ancient Greeks, Romans, they're all about the festivities, and they had one of the best diets I've ever encountered. Like the Mediterranean diet today is awesome. So imagine like the ancient version of that that's going to be a bit more fat-based, a lot more micronutrient density. You're going to have a lot less pastas and fillers, whereas you're going to just a lot more like olives, lamb, cheese, dairy, vegetables, fruits, both dried and fresh, like a pretty broad assortment. It was just overall just an excellent diet. But in terms of feasting, definitely. But beyond that, there was also, I found writings where ancient sports nutritionists would talk about how like you should eat mildly before you train and eat a ton after you train, like on the daily basis. So it's like, and then you should also, that athletes should sleep extra. And I was like that's bulletproof information. They also used hot and cold therapy. They used mobility. Wow. But it's important to remember, we get our scientific institutions from the ancient Greeks. So our sports science also. So it's like hot therapy, cold therapy, like you name something that we're doing today that they weren't doing. And I'll wait, like outside of some EMDR type, electronic stuff. So it's, they were ahead of the curve. They were even into doping. Like some of it was like probably effective. Some of it was probably like a little crazy. You know what I mean? Like eating goat testicles.
There we go.
Yeah. Oh, that's not crazy. No. The crazier stuff was like arsenic and like vasoconstrictors that could kill you if you had like a tiny bit too much, or like different, they also, it was common practice by pretty much everyone to also drink wine while you were training and competing. It was watered wine, about 50% wine, 50% water, little honey and, spice in there. And then they thought different spices, like, this is probably where they're onto something like cinnamon and cloves would give you more of a flush and a better, blood, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. He's got, and then obviously milk of the poppy, as they called it in the old days, opium, same thing, So it's, it's been around forever. Fad diets too. There was one guy one year, I believe it was right. So it would have been right around 480 BC. There was this guy who was actually a runner who went completely carnivore and won the Olympics, and a long distance runner. And after that, the next Olympic Games, everyone showed up. Half the runners were carnivore. No one had ever done it before. And then there was another year where I believe he was a strength athlete who said that the secret to his strength was massive, massive quantities of honey. Like he would drink honey, and the next year you show up and you just athletes just full of honey bottles and just, So it's like the more things change, the more they stay the same,
Mm-hmm. Was there any, do you know if there's any intentional fasting?
Definitely. So fasting was traditionally done, more for the spiritual side of things as opposed to performance.
Maybe more health.
Someone's
sick or something like that.
Physically and mentally, they're definitely, like fasting's definitely been seen as healing throughout many societies. But there was also something kind of close is that was actually very common practice through warriors throughout history across the world to eat very minimally before battle. Because they thought two things. First thing is they thought it would slow them down, like mentally and physically. And then the second thing would be that if they were wounded in the stomach, you had a much greater chance of dying if you had a belly full of food, because it would poison your blood. Whereas like a little bit of bread or a little bit of fruit or something, you'd probably, much better chance. So that, traditionally, there wasn't like a huge amount of eating before peak physical performance, at least when your life depended on it,
Being able to handle the stresses of your day, the stress of exercise, and being able to stick to your nutrition plan takes good rest and good quality sleep the night before. And if your mouth is opening during sleep, or if you're snoring, well, your sleep quality is compromised. That's why we partnered with the best mouth tape in the game, Hostage Tape. If you have a beard, it's going to stay on. If you have a CPAP, it's going to stay on. This tape is not going to fall off your mouth like most other tapes do when you're asleep. And to enhance the way you breathe through your nose, they also have nose strips.
Head over to hostagetape.com/powerproject where you can get a 3-month supply of hostage tape for only 65 cents a night. On top of that, you're going to receive a free pack of nail strips as well as a bedside tin. Again, that's at hostagetape.com/powerproject. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
How about weapons type of equipment?
Oh man, there's again, in the book, I get into like one group, the Fijians on the island of Fiji. Insane warriors, massive humans, super strong, but they were known for their war clubs. They essentially had a different one for every occasion. It's like fighting in the jungle, fighting in the open, crushing skulls, like their skull crusher was shaped like a pineapple, like a carved wooden pineapple. There were the ninja. Ninja's an interesting one because they're generally kind of looked at through the lens of like, mysticism or comic books, but in real life ninja exist. They were called the shinobi, and they were actually ultramarathon runners, or at least that's a theory I put forth in the book. We have essentially 3 or 4 different good accounts of them covering like up to 70 miles in a day. And because riding a horse is not incredibly sly, especially back like in peasant times when it was like the equivalent of like a Ferrari, like ripping through the countryside in a Ferrari. It was not subtle or very ninja-like. Yeah. They did almost everything on foot. And the shinobi, as they were called. And the thing is, they first learned how to fight and like use stealth tactics from the Yamabushi, who are essentially mountain ascetic monks in Japan who were around long before the ninja showed up. And there's another interesting group of mountain monks nearby, only 30 miles away from where the ninja first started. And they're called the Marathon monks of Mount Hay. They're still there to this day, been there for about 900 years. And these guys, they believe the path to enlightenment is running ultras. Like literally they think running a 7-year ultra marathon is the path to peak enlightenment. And they have a crazy running schedule. It's, it starts out in like the first year, it's like 50 miles a week. And then it builds up. And eventually, like by the time they finish it, you've run a distance equal to the circumference of the entire equator, 25,000 miles. And they're doing this on like a diet that's almost all milk, soy, vegetables, and rice, and just at a very slow pace. They do it in rope sandals. During the challenge, they go through about 3 pairs of sandals per day because they just wear out so bad. Their only protection from the element is a big, wide wooden hat, and they're only allowed to put it on if it's actively raining. Like it's this whole crazy thing. So we don't have any concrete evidence, likely never will, but in the book, I bring up the possibility that maybe if ninja were routinely, covering 70 miles in a day and they had a habit of learning from mountain monks, that maybe they learned from their neighbors who could also just cover mad miles. But in terms of weapons, they had crazy stuff because a lot of their stuff was like farm implements, like, the ancient equivalent of sawed-off hunting shotguns, like farm equipments adapted to war, little sickles that they put chains with spiky balls on called surigama, and, the ninja stars, that was a real thing. They would also frequently throw spikes.
48 years old. So the magazines that I used to read when I was a kid, like we see like martial arts stuff, like every kid was into all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
And, it was back when like people just thought karate was kind of the only martial art. You didn't really know what the hell's going on, but you would see like this ninja stuff in the back of the magazine, and they had like Chinese stars and nunchucks and all these things. And me and my brothers and my cousins and stuff would all try to like get this stuff or order this stuff, but it would be very dangerous. It wasn't like you were getting some toy version of, you actually bought one of these things, you threw it across the room and it just stick right in your wall. Your parents would be like, what is this in your wall? You're like, I don't know what that is. They cut yourself with it slightly. You're like, whoops.
They got a South Park episode about that. I think the boys are playing with a ninja star and one gets hit in the eye and they try to like cover it up.
Yeah, that thing does, like, you don't know which way that thing's going to spin. It's like worse than a Frisbee.
No, you have an 8-year-old with like a noodle arm throwing in like the 360 degrees of possibility.
Throw that at me. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. But no, they were gnarly. They like poison stuff too. But anyways, there's crazy weaponry. We were talking earlier about the West African tribes, like adapting super quick when Europeans showed up with gunpowder weapons. Like they would take their war canoes, some of which could hold like more than 100 people, 20 rowers and 80 warriors, and they would mount like small canoe or small cannon on the front of these canoes and use them like modern like warships almost. You know, the same thing in Alaska when the Russians tried to invade America once and were driven out by a Native American tribe called the Tlingit. And that might be one of the only reasons we're not speaking Russian to this day. But it was the same thing. They adapted. They like, you see different like tribes come in contact with guns, react different ways. A couple of them just like, oh, cool, that's how this works. All right, so that's how we're going to use them. All right, cool. And then they started digging trenches and having riflemen and mountain cannons and fortresses. And so it's, again, it's like human, the human spirit is such an innovative and creative thing that it's as rough as warfare is, it provides an excellent medium to demonstrate that.
Most of the stuff you looked at and studied, are these people that are culturally forced to train because it's a cultural thing? Are they slaves? Like, what's kind of the deal with most of the stuff that you've researched and looked up?
So generally, most of the cultures I looked at, it varies a little bit, but most of the cultures I look at, if you were to look at it from like a modern anthropological perspective, you'd say that they created cultures that rewarded training. So it's like if you're a real culture, if you create a culture and you're like, all right, if you're really good at wrestling, lifting and running and shooting a bow, like that's really, you know what I mean? Like that's where you get your man points from. Generally where your reproductive opportunities would come from, being good at this thing or that. Like, for instance, if I was like really, really, really good at jumping on a pogo stick, probably wouldn't translate as much into like, normal world and my ability to attract a mate as per se some of the things that I do, So it's like, that matters. For instance, tribe in Africa, almost all the men can just jump way higher than any NBA athletes. The Maasai, they're lion hunters. But the thing is, the reason for that is that the way that you attract a mate is by doing the adumo, which is a jumping dance that just like repeated plyo pogos over and over again. And like the highest jumper gets the most broads. And so like,
That's where the term broad jump came from.
basically, literally, clip it. But like, so you do that for a couple thousand years and like, you know, dudes get good at jumping real quick when that's on the line. You know what I mean? So, you know, it's all
What a great incentive.
bro, I'm saying, bring it back. You know what I mean? I think I can think of a couple guys that would like that brought back. But, and then, you know, there's also just crazy genetics in the book too. Like Thor, the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that he is like he is because of something called the founder effect. Okay. Which means his entire population, the entire population of Iceland was founded by a very small group of people. That very small group of people all happened to be jacked Viking warriors, or more specifically Viking warriors, and therefore way more jacked, way bigger, way stronger than the average person. They started the family. Those family members had family members, and they bred with each other for the next 1,000 years, literally about 1,000 years. So you have 1,000 years of just a population evolving from all freak athlete giants. And then what do you get? You get Iceland, the strongest country in the world, and it's not even close. Not even close. You know, per capita, like I believe in terms of like the strength, like the strongman world, the only country that that has more titles than them is America, and we put forth like 1,000 more competitors than they have, or something like that. But so it's like the same thing with Jamaica. You had just by chance about 600,000 African slaves from West Africa that just by chance happened to have a very high incidence of type 2A fast twitch, like muscle genes, and then large hearts and a couple other little things. And then you brought them, they created an entire population. And then of course you get a sprint culture in Jamaica where they're constantly training, they're developing method, like, you know, and you get the fastest country in the world. Again, not even close.
Yeah, I think Thor's dad was pretty much the same height as him when I went and
Well, look at his siblings.
visited him. His dad was like working on, the other part of the building of the gym, and they were expanding out. And he came over and shook my hand, and his hand was bigger than Hapthor's. And I was like, what the hell is going on with this family?
Yeah. I mean, so it's like, you see, when you look at warriors are, and the Vikings were, warriors among warriors. But when you look at it around the world, you see like just some crazy things in terms of physical potential, but also the mental and the spiritual stuff. I mean, being able to run for 7 years, that's amazing. And then also a lot of it, admittedly, is just cool. Like, learning that the Apache were one of the forerunners of the whole nasal breathing movement by going for tempo runs, specifically hill runs, and filling their mouths with water first. They would teach their children at a very young age, hey, run to the top of this mountain and back. I want you to fill your mouth with water first, and when you get back, I want you to spit it out on the ground right in front of me, so I know you had it there the whole time. You didn't take any breaths through your mouth. And the warrior trainers, which was usually like an uncle, not a father, so you could be like a little more harsh, in a lot of these cases, because your dad can only go so hard on you, whereas your uncle can whoop your ass a little bit. Or whoever the trainer was would expect them to spit that water back out to show. So it's like a lot of it just, it's like super interesting, but I don't think I've yet found like a modality of fitness or health improvement that I didn't cover in the book in some capacity that wasn't here 1,000 years ago,
Have you done any, like, I guess I'll say research on like the downfall of some of these like empires?
All of them.
Really? Because, like we were joking about, like in the beginning, like we lived in the woods, and if somebody came to your campsite, they either fall in line or, oh shit, we have to kill them. Like, we are very far from that. So like, how did other empires kind of transition from that to, again, maybe falling?
There's only one way it happens. It happens in 1,000 different flavors of this one way, but it all starts with inner decay. Same thing, like the Spartans were a tiny little group, like a very small proportion of Greece. They weren't even ethnically related to a lot of Greece. They had been there. They descended from an earlier population, like essentially Native Americans per se would be here. They rose up. They kept like a very insular, they made a culture entirely around training. And because they had indentured servants, they weren't fully, it was kind of like slaves, but not in the typical way. It was more like a second-class citizen population that did all the farming for them, called helots. All they did was train all day long. And they didn't, train, hunt, chill. And they developed such a peak level of fighting prowess that it wasn't even close with other Greeks who had the same tactics and armor and weapons as them. Problem is, they became victims of their own success because they start conquering everyone, marching outward. Soon they control all of Greece, even a little bit of like, Asia, Turkey and whatnot. The problem is that you can't rule other people without taking on their ways. So the Spartans for the first time start using actual money. Before that, they didn't use money. They used like little iron ingots essentially as currency. They start taking gold. We see in the archaeological records, Spartan houses that, buried gold caches from this 4th century, whereas not so much in the 6th century BC. And they eventually start taking on these ways, get overextended, move away from their, for lack of a better word, like concentrated Spartan ways. And then soon enough, and ironically though, the Spartans are interesting because they hung on for like more than a century after they lost power. They lost power. Alexander the Great kind of rose up and filled the vacuum. But his dad, there's a funny story I like that his dad, when the Spartans were essentially just a sideshow, like people would go there to look at what they used to be, but they weren't a military power, nothing really anymore. But they still wouldn't surrender to Alexander's dad when he made all of Greece bend the knee. The only people who didn't were the Spartans. Little Sparta, backwoods, nothing left, no power. And he sent them a letter that said, if you don't surrender, I will come in and I'll raise your land. And if you don't send me this tribute, I will come in and I will take your women. And if you don't do this. And so the messenger brings us the king of Sparta and his dingy little kingdom, centuries after their heyday has passed. And he reads the letter, if you don't do this, I'll do this. And if you don't do that, I'll do that. And the Spartan king was like, okay, bring that letter here. Give me your pen. And he just takes it and he turns it over. And on the back, he just writes something real quick and hands it back to the messenger. The messenger takes that all the way back to Macedonia, hands it back to Philip, Alexander's dad. And he turns it over. And on the back, all it says is, if. And so to the very end, they were like, come get some. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't win. That's not about that. Come get some. You know what I mean? And so like that is something that like I'm like, that's going to make a good tattoo, just if. And so it's like, and that sums them up to the end. And beyond that, like the Spartans were known for being sarcastic, like hilarious, dry humor. And like, in 300, they kind of allude to it a little bit. I thought it was actually kind of cool. Like, we will cover the sky with arrows. He's like, so we'll fight in the shade. Like that was actually like, well, that was a real line they took from history. A guy really said that. But so it's like, anyway, when looking to examples, like it's really, really hard to beat that,
What video kind of popped off the most for you? Because I know you've had a lot of videos that have gone viral. And why do you think some of these videos have caught on? Like I think you're correct in saying like there's a massive attraction to this. Innately for some particular reason. I think a lot of it has to do with like, there's a lot more inside of us than we think. And we're talking about like freaky athletes and people that have freaky genetics, but even undersized people, even someone who's 100 pounds, has so much within them that we can't calculate it. We can't tell what they have. Like they might be able to run, they might not be able to lift the heaviest weight, but they're going to be able to have a capacity somewhere else.
Oh, no, it's more important for people like that because, they got like to give some people my biggest surprise here is that so many people are interested in this. I got on social media. I started posting social media stuff about this 2 years ago and 1 million people have followed, between the couple platforms I'm on. And I had no idea. I thought I was just a geek with like a super niche, interest. And it's super cool for me to see that. But in terms of like who this stuff is for, it's for everyone. But like that person who thinks that they're not there, that they don't have it, that they're not genetically gifted or whatever, like that's the guy who I would point this material, and it doesn't even have to be through me, but look to the historical examples, look to what's possible. Look to guys like Bill Peanuts West, who had a natural body weight of 104 pounds and ended up squatting more than 600. You know what I mean? And I mean, just made
original founder of West Side Barbell.
The man, Louis, looked to himself. Louis, inspired Louis. Louis was a kid on a military base in Germany who read about Bill West in a magazine and had an idea to found West Side Barbell. And look where that went. So that's another example. And Louis isn't probably what you would call genetically gifted either. And that, and I mean, the guy did superhuman things. So, I mean, it's important to remember. And for myself, like someone out there, mathematically speaking, it's likely that someone out there listening to this at some point walked by me as a homeless person on the street and stepped over me, on the way to work one day and didn't even know. And I've arguably done some pretty cool stuff in the 6 years that I've been sober and a participating member of society since then. So if I had looked at that and been like, oh, dude, I'm not, I'm not this or I'm not that,
Mm-hmm.
like I might as well not even try. I'd still be there,
Yeah, and maybe your genetics aren't obvious. You know, some
That's right.
people's genetics maybe are more obvious because they're 6'8" or something like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can honestly say the only thing I got that's like a little different in my recipe is the weird fast twitch thing. Like, you're not going to find anyone who can out sprint me outside of an NFL combine or an Olympic meet, most likely. You should have seen Graham's face the first time we went out and sprinted barefoot. But that was like the only natural inclination that I had. That, and then when I was in prison, they told me that I had a weird thing with my brain. It's not like a spectrum-based disorder, but it's called low latent inhibition, which means that my brain is technically worse than yours is at like filtering out data, which means that the brain either gets overwhelmed or it adapts to like that extra data input. And
Like, I'm already in prison. I don't need more bad information.
No, I know. They told me, I'm like, so
Kicking
what
me
is,
while I'm down?
no, like, what does this mean? But basically it's like you get more overstimulated by stimuli easily, but also my brain doesn't have the same novelty response that a normal one does. So when I look at a problem or a set of data, it tends to be from a fresher perspective each time, where it's not just like the same old thing again. The way that it was described to me was like, if you look at a doorknob, you see a doorknob. If I look at it, I see a knob with screws, blankets, I see the components as separate things. Kind of like a dog smells the components of food, but a human smells the complete dish. So like those, but those aren't like being able to run real fast for like a few seconds doesn't exactly translate to like a bunch of real world, like potential. So it really is just like, you don't have to have anything to be something. You just have to start doing something.
In terms of your training now, strength training and stuff, what are you doing to prepare your body? If there's anything you have to do to prepare your body for the next thing,
So
1,000
it's
miles.
super interesting because like even me, like there's not data or an established path on how to prepare for something like this. There's tons of data on how to prepare for a 100-mile event, something for a few days, even a week long. But the thing is, when like this event could take, up to a month, somewhere near a month. So if I peak right before the start of it and I get my body right to the brink to be in peak form and I go into this, there's no way I'm going to make it through the next 20 something days of running, 30 to 40 to 50 miles a day. So I've actually kind of been playing with the idea of like building a strong foundation, very strong joints, a high strength to weight ratio, stripping away the extra body fat from the bulk, getting like lean and light. I'll put on a few pounds of body fat right before the event, but, and then really just kind of ramping up a lot of low intensity volume, building, doing like some like back-to-back 30 mile runs for like 3 days, take a week off where I'm just doing some rucking and lifting. The next week, do like 5 days of 30-mile runs back to back to back. And then, it's again, if I just do the typical, like normally when you train for an ultra, you build to a peak, you get to the peak, kind of let yourself chill for a couple weeks going to the event, just real light, but you still have that peak performance. And then you take that into the event, dump it all out, in a day or two, and then that's it. But it's like, that's not going to work here because my body will, and I'm also going to be running a lot on cement, which is, also a lot more challenging than the trails I'm used to. So, I'm looking at it kind of like that, basically just gonna get jacked, shredded, really fit all around and maintain my capacity for like ultra endurance. But I'm also like, I ran my last ultra 4 weeks ago. I start my training camp again in 2 weeks. 6 weeks, I'm not going to have detrained that much. My body will have rested a bunch. My broken foot will have healed up, but
Still broken? I thought.
no, I mean, I broke it 4 weeks ago and I'm walking around. I'm not running yet, but I walk, lift, assault bike, barefoot, all that now. The first 2 weeks were kind of rough, but yeah, no, like normally they say 6 weeks to heal, like for the bone to like rejoin, another 2 weeks for the calcium to fill in. And so it looks like I'm, oh yeah, you weren't here for this. So apparently I have superhuman bone healing.
Nice.
Yeah, the doctors were like,
Wolverine.
yeah, no, that was actually what he said. And I was like, wouldn't it be Deadpool more? Because Wolverine's bones they're metal, they don't break.
He's like, well, I didn't know you were so into all this stuff. I don't know what's going on.
I actually went home and tweeted about it after. I was pretty offended. But yeah, no, they're like, the only thing I've heard of that's compared, my doctor's an MMA doctor. He's like, the only thing I've heard of that's comparable is this guy, Yoel Romero, crazy freak of nature, MMA fighter, got his skull fractured in a fight. And then by the time he got to the hospital, there was also already like calcium buildup around the edges of the fracture, and like just like less than an hour later, and they were just like, and so they're like, that's the only thing like at the scale of bone healing we've never seen. So I was like, that's pretty sick. I'll take it.
Yeah, you're obviously super resilient with all the shit that you've done over the years. You were mentioning earlier that your coach, he kind of specializes in people being able to do stuff after they're already like messed up. They're already dehydrated.
Yeah, you got to talk to him at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him because, some of my understanding is when you get dehydrated, that your body starts to do a lot of really cool things. Obviously, you can be in a danger zone. So you always want to be cautious of that. But your body's starting to produce ketones and your body's starting to try to make up, I guess, for the fact that you're dehydrated, and you can start to burn body fat pretty quickly. And what are some of the things that you've seen and have you trained specifically, like when you're doing these 30-mile runs? Are you like, maybe I'm just not going to drink as much water today. I'm just going to go out and actually kind of specifically train a little dehydrated?
No, I don't. So for me, it's the opposite. It's like you do got to stretch your body and get it accustomed to that. But I train I train at the higher side of volume and intensity for what is required of me. But no, for me, I would just take that same amount of water and probably just do more work on it, as opposed to taking less out.
Just drain it out.
Yeah, well, just like also it will help me with the pacing. And like, cause I do think, unlike other ultra runners, I have to account for the water. Like I have to weigh water. I have to carry all of it. There's no aid station. So I'm already monitoring it. So it's like, I need to know what's ideal, what's not ideal, and what's last resort for covering 20 miles, in terms of how much water to have, because oftentimes there's that between watering holes for me.
And some of it, you're not a small guy. So if you were 160 pounds, then maybe you wouldn't have the same discussion. You wouldn't have to lug around probably as much water or liquid with you.
Well, that too, and muscle mass. I'm 40 to 50 pounds heavier than the average ultra runner, my same height, my equivalent height. I am, variably between 8 and 20% body fat, depending on what I'm doing. And so like a lot of my weight is muscle. Like I'm a dense person, and muscle requires, it's all water, you know what I mean? That's the cool thing about like crazy jacked UFC fighters that can cut, like Yoel Romero, that can cut a bunch of weights because it's all muscle. So you can dehydrate muscle. You can't dehydrate fat, but it kind of plays the opposite hand when you're trying to like, you know what I mean? So when you're trying to minimize how much water you have to carry and drink and plan for. So, but that's why we run the tests. Like, I would go out and equivalent temp, in 100. Like I know, if I go out in 100, it's 104 degrees on that day at peak temperature, and I'll run 40 miles in the heat on that day. I know how much water my body will go through. I know I'll lose about 21 pounds of water throughout the day, and that I'll be able to accurately place somewhere between 9 and 11 of those pounds if I'm stay on top of my fluid and, proper electrolytes for retention, carbs for retention, all that throughout the day. So I know I'll come home roughly 10 pounds lighter than I was at the end of the day. And if I'm doing a multi-day event, or I've only had to do a couple where it got that hot, but it's like, then exactly how much you have to try to replace by the time you go out for the next morning after your 4-hour break for food, shit, and sleep. Excuse me, but you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And, being someone that's communicated with Zach Bitter a bunch, I know Zach he's a ultra runner as well. He's holds some world records and stuff like that. And I know that he's been a little bit more of a keto, low-carb proponent, but obviously he still is consuming some carbohydrate because you kind of need them. Kind of what have you found? I'm sure it matters a lot. Like you're going to get dehydrated. I'm sure you're going to need a lot of carbohydrates, but maybe on some other runs, maybe you don't need as many carbs.
So with carbs, especially if you're fat adapted, you really only need them for 2 specific purposes. The first would be the carb load leading into the event itself, And I've gone from, instead of doing a more intense 48-hour, 24-hour carb load with a lot of liquid carbs and stuff, to doing 48 to 72 hours, potatoes, lentils. Most of my carbs come from fruit, potatoes, lentils, and then, as I was telling Nsima, like traditional corn and stuff like that, blue corn, whatever. And so I would do that, but generally for the carb load, and then for hills. You need to have some on hand for hills because that just takes carbs to get up hills. So
it's going to jack your heart rate up and make your breathing a little bit higher, right? So
yeah, it will, but it just, there's just more of that muscle involved.
You go from zone 2 to zone 3 or 4.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And even locally, like just the burn in your calf, you know what I mean? So, it takes some time, but you learn to apply that. I do the honey packets too. Those honey stinger ones are good. They got a little electrolyte in them too. I tend to take, make my own. There's a drink, the Rara Murray Tribe. They're some of the best ultra runners, probably the best ultra runners on planet Earth. I'm actually going down the train with them next year. But there's a drink they make using, the version I make uses raw milk, corn powder that's been roasted and soaked in lye to make it easier to break down for the gut, more digestible and bioavailable, with a little bit of cinnamon and honey in it. And oh my God, it's delicious. And so, stuff like that, it makes a big difference to get it in, but you just got to know where to aim your carbs, particularly because Zach's a good buddy of mine. He's like, informally speaking, my running coach in terms of like if I need to get faster on like a section or something, like Zach's the first guy I go to. and he's a little bit more low carb than I am. I do a little bit more, but again, more muscle mass and just kind of a bigger dude. But yeah, we're both pretty partial to looking, pretty heavily towards fats for fuel. And that's just also like, that slower, lower burn. And then the thing I notice also is it's nice not to have the insulin spikes through the event, just because you don't have as many peaks and valleys.
What's that corn called, by the way, for people who are interested in it?
Masa Harina. I just use this stuff from Bob's Red Mill. I love that company. But there's all sorts around. There's also, my wife gets some from the Navajo tribe, some blue corn. I don't know the brand off the top of my head, but there is a Navajo tribe members offering a blue corn version that we also really love.
Okay.
What are people missing when it comes to conditioning? Again, you're someone that does jujitsu. People talk a lot about strength, and you see a lot of strength and conditioning style workouts being done more and more on Instagram. But I don't really believe that people are doing maybe as much on the conditioning side of things. It seems like that's a huge part of jiu-jitsu, a huge part of all sports, but it kind of gets pushed to the back. I was watching the football game last night. The Cowboys were on, and their defensive end, who's one of the best players in the entire league, he was just gassed. And now it was the fourth quarter. He sprinted play after play after play. So sometimes these things happen. But in my view, I'm like, this is a professional athlete. Like,
Agreed.
He should be ready to rock all the time.
Agreed.
And I think that a lot of people they kind of push the conditioning off to the side. They're like, I'm usually pretty okay, like in my event or in my thing. And I'm always thinking, like, I wonder if they really know. I wonder if they know how much harder they could push.
There's that too, but there's also the fact that as your fatigue increases, your cognitive ability declines. So the better your conditioning, the better clearer you're thinking later in the game when the other guys are slowing down, they're getting brain fog. And then also the biggest thing, anyone who's seen an MMA fight, it's confidence. I had the confidence to take this fight where, like, when I fought MMA or jiu-jitsu, wrestling, any of that, I had an incredible engine. And so I was never afraid, I could turn it up and put it at 9 and hold it there for the whole match with and I knew the other guy wasn't going to be able to stick with it, Pat, you know what I mean? And then also I had the confidence to try things, to take risks, to know that if it went bad, I had the energy to scramble out or to defend the takedown. So that's a big part of it. But as far as the actual training goes, it's actually incredibly simple. Not easy, but conditioning, being like just a massive conditioning machine, cardio beast, never gets tired, super easy. You got to do 3 things. Train each of your 3 energy systems. That's it. Okay, your phosphorus system, creatine phosphate, whatever you want to call it. That's your short bursts of a few seconds, got to be doing that. You got to be doing some, some sprint, some jumping, some explosive lifting, whatever it is. Doesn't have to be heavy, probably shouldn't be heavy, but should be fast, okay? Then second system is your, anaerobic / glycolytic system, primarily carbohydrate fueled. That's your intermediate stuff of 30 seconds to a couple minutes. That's an area where people tend to shy away from because you get a lot of burn. It burns.
Yeah, go run like a 400 or something.
Yeah, exactly. But it's one of the most important because it's not just building direct endurance. It's also teaching your body to clear lactate, or lactic. It's different, but lactic acid, we'll just simplify it. Trying to clear the acid from you teaches your body to clear the acid from your muscles quicker, which means you recover and other things. There's also, and then finally, of course, is number 3, aerobic, and that's your low and slow. And again, you don't have to be running. You could be sitting on a bike in the gym watching Game of Thrones. You could be rowing a rowboat in the middle of a lake with your wife, rucking, whatever the thing is. You know what I mean?
It's just enough to be a little bit annoying, though. I think that's important for
just
people.
Just a little bit, yeah.
It's like it's pretty easy, but as you start to do it for 10, 15 minutes, you're kind of like, I just want to stop.
Yeah, yeah. And so just get to 30, and then, so you train those 3 energy systems, train them consistently. You don't have to train them with crazy volume or intensity. You just have to train them regularly. Again, this is all stuff I outline in the training programs on my website because it's like, I myself, when I was trying to just get into basic training, it's like, well, there's so much stuff to do, but I have to move. You're telling me I need to move linearly, laterally. You're telling me my core needs 4 type of exercises just to have basic function? I need linear, I need lateral, I need rotation and anti-rotation. Like, well, what do I do? How do I organize this? What's the best? So it's just, I simplify it. Many of the programs on my website are free also. I never want, I come from poverty. I never want money to be the reason someone doesn't get good training. All due respect to Jeff Cavalier, I started out just watching whatever YouTube videos were there to learn how to exercise, and got nothing against him, but probably his training's probably not the best suited for my goals, as I've come to find out. So I never want that to be an obstacle for anyone. If you want to train like a badass, train like a Spartan, train like a hybrid athlete at a high level, train with a historic kettlebell program, then come get it, son. But Fitness is fitness.
For years on this podcast, we've been talking about the benefit of barefoot shoes. And these are the shoes I used to use back in like 2017, 2018. My old Metcons, they are flat, but they're not very wide and they're very stiff and they don't move. That's why we've been partnering with and we've been using Vivo barefoot shoes. These are the Modus Strength shoe because not only are they wide, I have wide ass feet and so do we here on the podcast, especially as our feet have gotten stronger, but they're flexible. So when you're doing certain movements, like let's say you're doing jumping or you're doing split squats or you're doing movements where your toes need to flex and move, your feet are able to do that and perform in this shoe, allowing them to get stronger over time. And obviously, they're flexible. So your foot's allowed to be a foot. And when you're doing all types of exercise, your feet will get stronger, improving your ability to move. Andrew, how can they get their hands on these?
Yes, head to vivobarefoot.com/powerproject and enter the code that you see on screen to save 20% off your entire order. Again, that's at vivobarefoot.com/powerproject. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
So, to put it nicely, you've been through some stuff.
That's very nicely.
Yeah. But thinking about like the modern man, right? Modern father,
Sure.
modern 8 to 5 guy,
Sure.
enjoys playing football or enjoys watching football on the weekends. How can somebody like that develop a resilient mindset or resiliency to do something a little bit harder? I'm not saying you've ran for 24 hours. You've ran across a state. You're going to run across multiple states. You're going to run across the country. That's some shit, dude.
So
how can somebody who's not doing anything near that start to do some harder stuff?
I mean, I think you'd be a pretty good example. You seem to be doing pretty good at it. You do things just outside your comfort zone and do them consistently. Like, I mean, I remember before you did jujitsu when you were just like, you told me you were like considering it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now look at you. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? That's light years ahead.
Mhm.
But beyond that, it's a game of inches. So a lot of times, a lot of people know I'm Japanese or, part Japanese. My mom.
I had no clue.
Yeah, no. I know people are like,
I love people
wait,
like you. You just pull it out when it's convenient.
No, I do. I do.
I'm kidding.
But no, people are like, hey, so like, not to be a dick, but like, what are you? And I'm like, oh, my buddies at Barbell, they're like, and until like it came up in conversation, like, oh, we just assumed you were like light skinned, and I was like, no. So Japanese, part Japanese, half Japanese, my mom, and they tend to approach progress a little differently than we do. So in America, we have the home run mindset, and that's cool, swing for the fences. But it's only cool if you have the grit to do that over and over again and fail over and over again, and most people don't. And so they get discouraged when a couple things don't go their way. I deal with it myself. But it's just, I also had like some, I don't want to say toxic, but let's say some harsh versions of masculinity early on. So I kind of hear those voices sometimes, but not necessarily the best way to go. But in general, everyone deals with it. So completely understandable. But Japan, they approach it a little bit differently. Instead of trying to swing at home runs every time, they look at what's called Kaizen, or the compounding effect of incremental daily gain. So that's, if I gain 1 inch per day, that's actually 8 or 9 inches per week, not 7. You know what I mean? And so it's just small wins consistently every day. For some people, it'll be getting in that cold plunge when you don't feel like it. For some people, it'll be working out. For some people, it'll just be passing on the extra donut, whatever it may be. But look for small wins to incrementally build on and use those to approach goals. So it's like, if you've never run before, running a 5K is a great goal. That's, a little over 3 miles. That's amazing. If you've done some running, run longer. Lifting, do something that puts you out of your comfort zone. And I don't mean that in the generic sense, but I mean like actually. Like the first time my skinny ass walked into super training, like with a bunch of monsters that could lift, fucking 1,000 pounds, like that was not within my comfort zone. But I wanted to learn how to lift 500 pounds. I knew I could run 50 miles in a day probably, but I wanted to learn how to lift 500 pounds. So I went somewhere where I was going to be, starting at the bottom of an entirely new ladder outside of my comfort zone. And obviously, that developed into doing that and, achieving everything I set out to and more.
To expand a little bit on this idea of like making consistent progress, you have to realize too, there's going to be regression as well. There's going to be regression in the main goal, and there's going to be regression in all these like little side goals that you have.
Yeah.
Let's say you're just trying to gain weight. Well, as you gain weight, your pull-ups are probably going to be worse. Your running might be worse. Your conditioning might be worse. But it's, hopefully it's temporary, and hopefully it's something that you can not develop a blind spot about. And then same thing if you're trying to be faster, you're trying to be leaner. There's a lot of cool things that come along with that.
Yep.
Could be tons of health benefits, but you could also be leaving some other things behind, like strength and maybe some of the other things you enjoy. But just remember, it's just temporary.
Yeah.
And so when somebody starts jujitsu or somebody starts running and they're lifting and they hear all this stuff about you can't lift and do these other things at the same time, you're going to start to think that they're right. But they're not correct. Just stay in the pocket,
Agreed.
hang in there, let the defenders go flying past you, and eventually you'll find the open receiver. Eventually you'll find kind of your own right way. And when you do, it feels amazing because now you're doing a bunch of different things that you enjoy doing. And I think on this podcast, we share it so much about not just, we love lifting. And if that's all you love, then I guess that's fine. But I would like for people to find other things that they enjoy. And I'd love for people to maybe develop some other skill sets in case lifting just isn't there for them the same way it was before. If their goals shift, if they get injured, now they got other tools they can kind of utilize for other aspects of their life.
Yeah. I mean, I don't always love lifting. I lift all the time, but sometimes it's because it's required of me for what I do. And other times it's because I like lifting.
Makes it easier to get it done.
Yeah. So sometimes you might just get tired with the thing and you might want to go do calisthenics for your strength stuff for a while and just focus on jiu-jitsu or yoga or whatever your thing is. And so I think also it's also important to realize that the more diverse your training is, the better it is for your health. Generally speaking, if you put all your eggs in the powerlifting basket or all your legs in the ultramarathon basket, it's not going to compare in terms of your health, how long you're going to be here, your quality and ability to interact with the world, your kids, your grandkids. It's not going to be the same than if you're doing a little heavy lifting, a little endurance, some mobility, some, you know what I mean? Some like animal flows, whatever your thing is. Because that diversity like that is, I mean, it keeps, you're tickling all the right buttons for longevity.
Let me ask you this, man. I find that for me, finding weaknesses is something that helps me like really get to a new level of strength in terms of everything else I do, right? So what are some things that you've been adding in recently that have really moved the needle for you and you maybe wouldn't have expected them to?
Honestly, the biggest thing was that Gladiator deadlift for sure, just with my lower back. But taken on the whole, I mean, it might be overly specific, but groin training. I've been doing a lot more like Copenhagen stuff and a lot more stuff because I do so much linear move, 1 foot in front of the other running in a straight line. Mm-hmm. And like I've always been pretty good at hitting like the outer glutes and stuff, but man, the groins, so I've been doing a lot more, awesome. But yeah, in terms of like just as an overall, I think that's an important thing to highlight, aggressively seeking out your own weaknesses at the physical, mental, and spiritual level. There's no way to get stronger. Evander Holyfield used to say, find the truth before the truth finds you. And I mean, I've always loved that. He was talking specifically about fighters who would hire like coaches to fluff their confidence, but not be super honest with them. Like, hey, dude, you suck at this. You need a better left hook. Or, hey, dude, like this guy's going to light you up. Pass on this fight until you're ready. Like you need someone, even if it's just yourself, you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, if you're bad at something, if you have some lingering thing, like be honest about it and go address it. Because that's honestly how I've evolved myself physically, is just by chasing the weakest point repeatedly. It's like, it's very tempting to do the things you're good at. But like I started running ultramarathons because my endurance was terrible. It was terrible. Like I said, I'm like, all my genetic bricks got put in the fast twitch, so it's like 2 or 3 good explosions, 3 or 4, and I was just done. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I need endurance. I also observed in prison, like the mental and physical level endurance was the key survival trait that like, I've been locked up with the worst. Like literally they put the Golden State Killer he went in my cell right after, like put him in my old cell right after I got out. Not that he was a little old man at that point, but point being, like I've met terrible human beings. I've met dangerous human beings, and the one thing that the most dangerous had in common was just their ability to endure, like with indifference, hard, cold, hot, whatever it was. And so like I realized pretty quick, I'm like, all right, like being real fast and flashy is nice, but I might want to get like some long-term grit here and some like, mental endurance with this also. And then, so again, same thing, your weak muscles, your weak parts, find them, and if you just play to the bottom repeatedly and bring that bottom up, over time, the whole vessel rises. Yeah.
Do you think there's something to training your groin more so than like maybe we understand? Because you might be tapping into like the psoas, and then you might be tapping into I believe it's Chinese medicine, talking about like your chi.
Yeah.
And you hear kind of a lot of people talk about these, I don't know, these different parts of our body where certain amounts of energy can come from and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about chi, but as far as the groin for sure. And so the reason I got into
Chi, and it just like radiates out from this area right here.
yeah, right there, like right down to about here.
Yeah.
But with the groin specifically, I was having psoas issues. So you brought that up, and just really tight on one side. I have a discrepancy in leg length. I mean, all people do, but mine, one side is pretty short, so I have a hip tilt, and that one hip gets tighter. So I started, kind of the reverse squats, the Copenhagen planks, you know what I mean, just general groin mobility. There's a guy on Instagram I just started following, or I just met him on Instagram, Range of Strength, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He has really good stuff. That's his approach to mobility kind of aligns with my own in terms of just like weighted stretching and full range of motion lifting,
I saw a video the other day of Jesus Oliveras saying this is the best, secondary exercise to a squat. Maybe you can kind of bring it up, but I saw him doing a leg press, and you just think like you just lay down and do a leg press, and you think everyone's going to kind of look the same when they leg press. His leg press doesn't look the same. His leg press looks so different,
like a zombie press type.
Like he just can move really well. He's a big boy. What is he, like 400 pounds?
Yeah.
But as he's doing this movement, just kind of watch till like he's able to open up his groin really well and see how his back stays flat on the machine. And it's all his legs moving.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect leg press.
And I was like, shit, like my body doesn't like doing that because I'm tighter than that. And so what will happen to me is I will, fold up. My butt will want to tuck underneath because the groin's not as flexible and so on.
Yeah, grease that groove. But yeah, I guess to an extent, like you, my base of strength training knowledge, a big part came from Westside Barbell. The other big part, and from Josh Bryant, Jailhouse Strong for sure. But the primary came from my buddy, Jack Tyler. He is a rugby strength conditioning coach. So some of my exercises perspective, just some of the nuances associated with training are a little bit different with how I do things because of that. One thing that I learned through him and just through watching European rugby strength conditioning programs is the leg press is actually a very ironically, a very functional movement. I mean, it's a completely isolated leg press, like a leg drive rather, think of when we're deadlifting.
It's a bad exercise, Yeah.
No, of course not. I mean, it's very, I will loosely say there's no such thing as a bad exercise. It's how you use it, how you deploy it. I mean, there's bad advertising for exercises. People that say, like, watch me do this, like hyper-specific 4-band Liver King core workout, and then it's going to make you punch harder. That's bad advertising, incorrect, unethical advertising for an exercise, but it doesn't mean that exercise is bad, per se. But what are you expecting it to do for you? That is where the disconnect for a lot of people lies. And the leg press, accurately applied, I mean, it's an isolated leg drive. It's, kind of like different variations of squats without the complications or the last part of a deadlift where you finish the hinge and it's just all leg drive to lock out. So it's like, when people do that, but specifically, I think it's great, man. I mean, especially if you want to work on, getting that fluidity of motion. If you want to do a thing, do it. It's martial arts, taught me anything. It's that, drillers make killers as jiu-jitsu folks say. But do it over and over again. Nothing wrong with that, man.
Something good to try out too. Everybody knows about the horse stance squat.
Oh,
but
yeah.
It's funny how
nice.
how
good
long the
too.
horse stance has been part of martial arts training.
Yeah, bro. It's
you know
good.
what I mean? And
horse stance, wall sit.
Mm-hmm. People have been doing that type of stuff forever, right? So it's one of those things where these things, the proof has been there for a long ass time.
I have an interesting note about the horse stance. Don't know why, no idea. Maybe somewhere a listener out there can help fill us in. The horse stance throughout history was traditionally used as a lower body conditioning exercise for strikers, while the wall sit was used more for grapplers. No idea why, but I have observed this. Okinawan karate, love the horse sit. Dagestani grappling, love the wall sit. List goes on.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a freestanding thing. I mean, if you want to overanalyze it, grappling, you're connected to another person, like you're connected to a wall, striking more freestanding, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Could
Horse
just be
stance.
chance.
Just a wide stance, right?
Yeah,
Like a
yeah,
wide stance squat.
Like literally and they used to, those of us who did traditional martial arts would just, they would just have you hold that for like minutes,
They would do it for time.
Yeah, for time, exactly. I use the wall sits a little bit more because I kind of like to drive back into the wall and really, you know what I mean? But, and you can also hold something a little easier with a wall sit if you want to stack some, goblet kettlebell hold or overhead kettlebell hold.
Yeah.
But gnarly exercise.
A lot of, I learned a lot of good wall shit in prison. Like literally just put your feet square with the wall, put your hands here, and then try to push that wall down for 30 seconds or 3 seconds.
I'd rather learn it from your book.
Yeah, you should. Preparing
I'm
for
just
war.
going to read Preparing for War, and hopefully I can avoid
Actually,
doing
Audible's
any time.
Audible's about to drop. The book's out on Amazon, paperback, hard copy, Kindle, etc. And Audible is dropping. So if you want to listen to it on one of these epic runs,
Who did the voice for Audible?
We're just hired a British actor.
Okay. Sick.
Yeah. I was like, I'm a pretty antisocial, introverted person. I have like a pretty small group of friends, and they're all eclectic. Tom Haviland, and just like random people who do random stuff in different directions. And one of them happens to be a leading man in Hollywood. And there for a second, I was like, nah, I'm not gonna. But that would have been funny.
You're friends with Tom Haviland? He actually exists?
He does. He's a real guy.
And he's in like New Zealand or something?
Australia, yeah.
Australia.
Yeah.
You know who he's talking about?
No, I don't. Sorry.
He was debatably, he deserves a big piece of the credit for my company growing to the extent that it did. We met right when I started Wild Hunt, and he was like he's a super hyper intelligent intellectual guy. And loves the history, loves the thinking, philosophy, all that stuff. So he found my stuff early. We linked up online. And for like the first, 3-6 months of my account, he reposted every post I did.
Wow.
And he had a following I didn't, you know what I mean? So it was like, my first 1,000, people who learned about my, Wild Hunt probably came from him. I was just texting him the other morning too. Yeah, he's nutty, but him and I are like...
Let's see if we can get him maybe he can be like Dr. Claw. We can have him on the show and just not show his head.
I can already tug he's not interested. He would turn down Rogan if Rogan asked. Or
get a weird voice maybe.
Yeah,
So you never see his face? Is that
no? He's a family guy. He likes to keep it private. And
I think years ago you can find footage of him doing some stuff, but he just trains out in his backyard. He's 6'6". I think he's 300 something pounds.
Yeah, 6'7", between 320 and 400 was his peak. He had spent a couple of years bulking to 400. But his, we really get along well because his perspective on strength training is kind of how I approach endurance training. And it's like, do your own stuff for your own reasons. He has no interest in joining World's Strongest Man or competing, doing any of that. And although I do compete occasionally, it's usually just for training races for my own adventures and for fun.
It looks like he has shoulder pads on.
Oh, he certainly does not. He is insane.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. He's and just a great human being, like truly a great human being.
Sick.
But so yeah, just and I like the way like I say, if you talk to me like every 3 months, you're one of my friends, and if you talk to me like every 90 days, you're a family member. But like I have, and it's not even like I am introverted, but I also just like have bad awareness of time, and so it's like I talk to him. I got a couple other buddies, and but other than that, so and now we're getting ready to leave Cali once and for all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you sometimes like to disappear into the woods for 2 weeks at a time.
I do longer if I can get away with it.
I saw a cool clip of Cam Hanes. I think this would be cool to kind of get you to comment on this. Maybe you can pull it up, Andrew. It was on Instagram. He was just basically talking about how he likes to train and what he's training for, and how maybe some of the other things he's done in the past maybe haven't been as useful for some of the stuff he's doing. He's just running, holding the camera. It might be that one that's on the left, the third one down, maybe. Yeah, probably that one. It probably needs some audio.
He was one of my mentors early on, right?
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, he's a super good dude.
Yeah, he's an animal. I mean, I know he's still putting in the miles.
Yeah, he walked me through some tough stuff. He was a good dude.
Hey, so I was listening to a good podcast. I put it in my stories, and it just reminded me of something. I mean, it doesn't really matter if
I need that hat.
you care what I say or not. That's fine. I'll just say what I've learned, and that I've run a lot. I've lifted a lot. I've lifted more, run less. It's like, I've ran more lifted less. And what I've learned is having a big bench or deadlift or whatever the fuck lift with a lot of weight is not going to help you kill shit. What will help you kill shit is endurance, being able to go further for longer at a higher level than everyone else. Miles under your feet, miles with weight on your back, mile after mile, and being at your best or better than everybody else when that opportunity comes. Endurance is all that fucking matters. Keep hammering.
Agreed. So yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. And that's the thing. Like, I've been in a wide variety of life-threatening situations in my current life in the wilderness, my old life in the streets and behind bars. And like I said, the guys who triumph are the ones with endurance, because it's not just about like, oh, hey, I can run or I can do this thing for a long time. It's, hey, I have the mental capacity to sit here and focus and weather this storm while everything around me tells me not to. And I mean, he's as good of an example of that as anyone. That he's a beast, Yeah,
and I think what he means is like Cam Hanes still lifts weights, and he lifts weights all the time.
Yeah, 3 days a week.
He's a huge proponent of lifting weights. Mm-hmm. But he was saying was a shift in his focus towards like, hey, let me go from 315 to 405. Yeah. Didn't necessarily have a result for what his goals were.
Yeah.
I think it's important for people to have perspective on like, what is your actual goal? And is that thing, working towards your particular goal? If it's not, then maybe it's not the right thing for you for that time.
No, I totally agree with that. I actually just I'm guilty. I just dealt with this myself because I was like, never deadlifted 600 pounds before. Like, pulled 550, but had a little more left in the tank, never pulled 600. And then I stopped and think, I'm like, okay, so is that going to make you run 1,000 miles better or make you better at fighting or this going from 550 to 600? Probably not, And so I was like, maybe I'll circle back when I'm, I don't have 1,000-mile runs on the docket. But no, dude, it's like, I mean, John Danaher says the same thing about jiu-jitsu. Like a jiu-jitsu world champion with a 400-pound bench press, if you increase it to 500 pounds, is he going to be a better jiu-jitsu champion? Of course not, And so it's very much where the rubber meets the road.
500-pound bench, though, is pretty respectable. We should talk about that for a little bit.
Mild. I want to know who that guy is, too. Yeah, I want to know who that guy is.
Where can people find you, man? It's always great to have you here.
Yeah, Wild Hunt Conditioning on all things, YouTube, Instagram. Check out the new book, Preparing for War, on Amazon. And if you guys want to see what I do up close and personal, A Good Day to Die is a documentary on YouTube. You can watch it for free. That follows me as I run across the hottest desert on earth, drinking steak shake and many other snacks. Actually eating a bunch of bison macaroni and cheese too.
Next time you can tell us about drinking your own urine as well. Strength is never weakness. Weakness never strength. Catch you guys later.
Nasty,
bye.
Guys.